So yes, I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Birmingham Abortion Rights, but with my other hat on, I'm chair of Aston UCU, and I've been involved in both reproductive politics and trade union politics, probably 4 more years than I care to remember. So what I want to speak to you briefly today, I'm not quite sure how much time, 5 to 10 minutes, okay, that's fine. So what I want to do in the period of time that I've got today is to basically talk about the state of abortion law and also make a case for why trade unions should support abortion rights. So my apologies for people who might know some of this stuff already, but I don't know where the audience understanding is at the minute. So, you know, I'm trying not to be patronising, but sometimes people don't necessarily understand some of the fundamentals. So in England, Wales and Scotland, the 1967 Abortion Act is the most significant piece of legislation that we have in terms of governing abortion. However, the 1967 Abortion Act provided legal grounds for abortion. It did not overturn the existing legal statute. And the existing legal statute, which applies to Northern Ireland, England and Wales, but not Scotland, so it's a bit complex, is the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act. Now what this means is, under the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act, that covers Northern Ireland, England and Wales, is that abortion is still a crime and it's still subject to penal servitude for life. So if you have an abortion in England and Wales and it's outside the terms of the 1967 Abortion Act, you can be sent to prison. And women in England are still sent to prison for having abortions. The last case I know of was in County Durham. It was 2 or 3 years ago, and a woman got a 2.5-year prison sentence. In Scotland, they didn't have the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act, but it's underpinned by criminal law, so it's still a criminal offence. Now, the reason that having abortion as a crime is a problem in terms of the way that abortion is regulated, for a number of reasons. Firstly, when the statute was written in 1967, and it's one of the most oldest surviving statutes there is, not completely, but one of the ones that's never really been tinkered with, is the fact it was developed at a time when abortion was predominantly, it was a surgical operation, and the way it was carried out was the medical techniques were more dangerous than they are today. Today, most abortions are carried out in very early pregnancy, and the majority of women now have medical abortions, and that involves taking 2 medications. So the problem with the legal situation as it is today is that, first of all, that clinical practice cannot actually operate to good international standards because it's constrained by abortion law. It's constrained by, so for example, whereas in other parts of the world, early medical abortion can be handled at GPs, that's not the case in the UK. In other parts of the world, nurse practitioners, nurse prescribers can offer medication abortion. We can't have that on the mainland because that's outside the terms of the 1967 Abortion Act. But also, and fundamentally more important, some of the most marginalised women are actually putting themselves at risk of a criminal sentence because they don't know that abortion against the law, and for whatever reason they're not able to seek medical advice, so they buy abortion pills off the internet. Now, I'm not advocating that is necessarily a safe thing to do, but when you're looking at the sorts of women that try and buy abortion pills off the internet, they are the most vulnerable in society, they're the most marginalised. They tend to be undocumented migrants, they might be women living in situations of domestic violence, they might have disabilities which make travel difficult, particularly if they live in rural areas, and so for a number of the reasons they feel unable to access a medical service in England, Scotland and Wales, and therefore they resort to buying pills off the internet not knowing that this is a criminal offence. Of Of course, the situation in Northern Ireland is more difficult still, and I'm sure most people in this are aware, is the fact that Northern Ireland was not covered by the 1967 Abortion Act, which means that lawful abortions in Northern Ireland are very few. There was about 14 last year. And women in Northern Ireland have to choose between travelling to the mainland, which is not accessible to everyone, although if you are in the poorest group, now your travel is paid for. If you do not have family support for childcare, you find it difficult to take time off work, you're on a 0-hours contract, all of those things means that you can't travel. You have to resort again to buying pills from the internet. Now there are some safe, medically supervised ways of accessing abortion pills online, but because of the kind of unregulated situation, so women accessing pills may not go to safe providers, telemedicine providers, they may go to unsafe providers. And again, an unsafe provider means that they will not have a telemedical consultation. Now, I would argue very strongly that access to abortion is a workplace issue, right? So this isn't just about women's private lives, this is about equality in society and equality at work. So for women to have access to work and for be able for them to actually maintain their working lives, that they need to be able to have control potentially over their reproduction. About 50% of all abortions that are carried out on Britain's mainland were carried out because of contraception failure. So these people that argue that you can just use contraception and everything will be okay, that's not necessarily the case. So about 50% of the time contraception fails, and the rest of the time people fail to use it because people are infallible. But particularly for the most marginalised women, that this is much more of a problem. And access to work is really important, and working conditions are really important. So what I'm here to ask today particularly is for you to recognise that actually abortion is a workplace issue and it's unrelated to gender equality, and that unless women can access abortion and other reproductive health services, they will never necessarily achieve gender equality at work. I'm also asking for you to support the decriminalisation of abortion. There is no need for abortion to be in the criminal statute at all. Canada decriminalised abortion in 1986. Nothing bad happened, right? Nothing bad happened at all. That does not mean that there are no regulations governing abortion. Abortion is just simply governed by the other regulations over medical procedures, right? So if we decriminalise abortion, that doesn't mean that everyone can provide abortions, it just means that you have to be medically qualified to provide abortions. We think that access to abortion needs to be improved across the UK, but particularly in Northern Ireland, obviously. We'd also ask you to see access to abortion as part of the broader framework in terms of pregnancy discrimination in the workplace. And that it can be very difficult for women who need to access abortion to necessarily ask for their legal entitlement, which is time off work, without, in relation to pregnancy, which should not count under statute as part of their normal absence from work, right? Pregnancy-related issues are supposed to be separate to your normal absence for work. However, abortion doesn't seem to be included in many workplace maternity policies, and we think it should be. We'd also like you potentially to go back to your unions and branches, and if you're not already affiliated with abortion rights and or Birmingham abortion rights, we'd like to call on you to affiliate with us. So I have got a model motion that some of you may want to kind of take back to your branches to consider, if that's okay. And so I'm going to pass that round, and really just now it's really just time for questions, if that's okay, within my 10 minutes.
Okay. Any questions? Stuart?
Well, it was a very comprehensive and interesting chat, and I think in the past we have affiliated the National Abortion Campaign, and we should definitely affiliate to this. And I also urge people to get their branches to invite CAP or other representative, and I intend to do that for my union, the National Education Union. I would also be interested in if you can say a little bit about the situation in the United States, which has been very virulent in the press recently. There's obviously a really massive bust-up on the issue opening up in the United States, and it'd be very interesting from her perspective on that.
Yeah, so the picture in the United States is quite mixed. The legal situation in the United States currently is that at the federal level, abortion is access to abortion is protected in the Constitution under Roe versus Wade. So Roe versus Wade is a very important case that most of you will probably have heard of, and that meant that women could access, and other pregnant people could access abortion in terms of the statute. So the individual states could not necessarily ban abortion because it was unconstitutional to do so. However, for a long period of time, organisations and individuals against abortion sought to overturn Roe versus Wade, and that has been happening for decades. In the 1980s and early 1990s, up to probably the end of Reagan as a president, which is probably late 80s, I think, early 90s, I can't. What they sought to do was to pass a constitutional amendment whereby the person protected in the Constitution would be from conception. That failed because of it had to get a constitutional amendment. You have to have ratification in a whole in the majority of states over a time period, and so that failed. Now, the cases that are going through, so at that point in time, back in the when it became clear, late 80s, early 90s, that the constitutional amendment to protect the fetus from the moment of conception was not going to go through, the anti-abortion movement in the US started literally setting up their own law schools, so their own higher education structure. So you have 4, potentially 5, depending on how you count them, equivalent of universities, but they are independent law schools, which were set up by the Christian Right in the US to train lawyers so that in 30 years' time, these would be the people sitting in both the state Supreme Court and potentially at the Supreme Court, the overall Supreme Court. And that is what's been happening. It was a 30-year plan. So what happened when Reagan came in, when Trump was elected? When Reagan came into power, they thought they had it and it didn't work. So now Trump came into power. So one of the big arguments was about who could actually be appointed to the Supreme Court. So they refused to endorse Obama's nomination just before the election, and so that Trump got to name 2 Supreme Court judges, one quite soon and one slight after. And so the current cases that are going on in Georgia and Louisiana and various other states that restrict abortion to very, very early or ban it completely, everybody knows that they will not come into effect now, all right, because they're unconstitutional. But those laws have been passed specifically to go up through the US justice system, whereby in 3 or 4 years' time, there will be a challenge to Roe versus Wade. And they're hoping by the time that those laws go up to the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court will have sufficient right-wing justices that Roe versus Wade will be overturned. Having said that, what's happening in the US at the minute is very mixed. So you have some states like Louisiana and Georgia and Alabama which are passing very, very, very controlled anti-abortion laws. You have other states that are actually going the other way. So many of the states, like Nevada, for example, had a ban on abortion, and then when Roe versus Wade came in, that meant that law didn't apply anymore, but they never overturned it. So technically speaking, if Roe falls, it would ban abortion again. Because all Roe versus Wade will do, it won't ban abortion nationwide, it will return it back to the states. So the individual different states. So as much as you've got states going into the ban abortion, the Louisianas and the Georgias and Alabamas, you've actually also got states going the other way and passing legislation whereby abortion will be protected even if Roe versus Wade falls. Which, on the face of it, is a good thing. However, if you think of the size and scale of the US, if you are a poor working woman in Missouri, having a good abortion law in New York is not going to help you, right? Because your ability to travel, and this is the thing with abortion, so it's the fact that globally and historically, women with money have always been able to access safe abortions, ever since there was a medical procedure whereby abortion could be carried out safely. Women have always, with money, have always been able to access safe abortions. And in fact, if you go back to one of the initial campaigners, which was a woman called Alice Jenkins, and she wrote a book back in the 1950s and 60s, and she about abortion law in England specifically, and it was called The Law for the Rich. Because women with money can travel, and that's always been the case. So they can travel internally in a nation, in the US, but they can also travel externally. So when the 1967 Act was passed in England, women with money, with resources, flew in from the US and from parts of Europe, and that's always been from Ireland and various to access abortion, whereas women without resources are unable to do that.
Thank you. Patricia?
I can remember I think it was about 1974, Willie Whitelaw made an attack on the abortion law and tried to undermine it by adding caveats to when you can have an abortion. So you could only have an abortion if you've been raped.
Yeah.
You could have an abortion out of choice or because it was anything to do with the health of the mother. And you had to have 2 doctors to sign.
Still do.
Thankfully that didn't get through, but given the proximity that it seems that the Tory party have got with Trump, do you think there's a likelihood that there'll be attacks on the rights that we've got at the moment?
So
from a fundamentalist
yeah.
view?
So at my last count, since 1967, there has been 51 attempts in Parliament to restrict abortion and only 2 attempts to actually more liberalise. Every year that I can remember, there has been an attempt in Parliament, virtually. Sometimes you go 2 or 3 years without an attempt, but then you get 3 in 1 year. There are currently private members' bills going through the House of Lords which aim to restrict abortion on a number of grounds. Now, in most cases, those attempts to abortion, because they come from private member bills, they're not necessarily going to go anywhere, but there is always the danger that this will actually result in it. Generally speaking, yes, the left has been better protecting abortion rights than the right. However, I think it's really important for everybody in this room to realise that the last moment in time, which was back in the 1990s, where we thought we were going to get abortion in Northern Ireland, under a Labour government, they traded the right of abortion for women in Northern Ireland to get 42 days detention without trial under terrorism legislation by doing a dodgy deal with the DUP. So, allegedly. Sorry, I must have put that bit in just in case you're recording me. Right, so, yeah, we're pretty certain it happened. So, yeah, so the other important thing is while we all know that the left has been there to protect the people without resources, We really also do not want to make abortion necessarily a party political issue, because what happens in the US, it has become a party political issue. The Democrats get in, things get better, the Republicans get in and they reverse it. So we need to try and still retain an element of cross-party coalition on that. But yeah, you're absolutely right that many of the leading Tory candidates that are there at the minute, if they thought they could get away with it, would restrict abortion. But, you know, so Theresa May had voted on a number of occasions for anti-abortion measures. But also, I think there is, one of the reasons that the 1967 Act hasn't been improved is the fact that politicians in general don't want to touch abortion, right? They just want to leave it because they don't want it to be a party. They don't want to deal with it because they're worried about that it will become a partisan issue. But that has meant that our Abortion Act has not kept. It's past its sell-by date, but we can't build enough people to challenge this because they don't want to touch it.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike, but that'll be the final question.
I think abortion is a working class issue. I remember my brother, when he was 19 years of age, had a friend who got a girl pregnant. The girl could not face up to the consequences. She was 17 years of age. She lost her life in a backstreet abortion. That's the reality of abortion. It's very much, as you say, if you're wealthy, you can deal with this situation. But there's many, many people in poverty who can't. And though the culture might have changed, where it's no longer so shameful as it was back in the 60s, the situation is that abortion should be a right on demand for all people, or for all women anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, can't agree more, right? So what I'm asking for people is to support decriminalisation, not just on the mainland, but also in Northern Ireland. There is no need, no other medical procedure is covered by criminal law, and this is governed by something passed in 1861 before the majority of working people even had the vote, and it's time it stopped. So.
Okay. If we can thank Pam for an excellent contribution tonight.